Thank you and welcome everyone. Good afternoon. This is the India Spotlight session where we'll be talking about opportunities in the next scale startup economy. It's my pleasure to welcome all our panelists. We have a fantastic, diverse panel today. Ms. Varsha Tagre, who is the managing director of Qualcomm Ventures. She's based in the Bay Area in the US. Chun Soo Kim, head of global investments at KB Investment. Dirk van Quackenbeck, managing partner at BNext, and Kabir Narang, partner at B Capital. Welcome, everyone. My name is Pranav Bai. I'm a partner at 314 Capital, and it's my pleasure again to welcome everyone to this session. Let's start off with our first question, and this is to all our panelists. As multi-geo investors, all of you have evaluated several comparative advantages and risks before entering India. You also have a pan-region mental model to compare multiple emerging economies as you evaluate them for investment opportunities. Could you walk us through how you evaluated the India opportunity? Which learnings have been enforced for you since you started deploying in the country, and what you're seeing as interesting opportunities for you as your company scale out in this economy? Let's start with Varsha.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. It's great opportunity to be here with my fellow panelists. I represent Qualcomm Ventures, and Qualcomm Corporate has also been active in India with a strong engineering base as well as marketing base in India. So we take a very long-term view on India as a geography. We think it's a wonderful country for many devices, not just the phones, but also for things in auto, things in IoT, in enterprise, and also things that you wear outside of the phone, many things that will be on the body as well. So ours is a long-term perspective on India. We are active in about 7 geographies around the world. And we think each geography needs its own investment thesis. And so we developed the thesis for India, looking at where the geography is in terms of infrastructure, devices, ability to pay, etc., and pace the investment thesis accordingly. A few learnings to share with this panel. Some of those would be common. The first one was for enterprise companies, it was hard to monetize in India. You need to figure out enterprise clients outside of India to monetize. It's changing, but I think that's change that's going to take some time. The second one is patience, and I think the timeline are shrinking compared to, I think, 10 years ago. We have shorter timelines for our companies to scale, but prior to that, they used to be longer. I think the transition that happened with Geo or other carriers to with technology has really helped this transition to be lower. But patience, I would say, is definitely required. So I would lead with those two and let the other fellow panelists add in their viewpoints.
Thank you so much, Varsha. Chun Soo, it'd be great to hear from you.
Yes. Thanks for the opportunity today. My name is Chun Soo, and I am the managing director at KB Investment. I lead all of our overseas effort. And as a part of my job, I get to travel the world and get to meet the entrepreneurs, not only from India, but from the North Europe to South America to US. And what I found, so Varsha just laid out the overview of the global market, and I think I will mention two things. One is wherever I go, I meet amazing entrepreneurs, so that's universal to me. But what's really interesting about Indian market is the talent pool, especially the engineering talent pool, and I think that really distinguishes Indian market, and I see a lot of ambitious entrepreneurs backed with all of this engineering power. And so that's something that really stands out for Indian market. One other thing is that there is a locality to it. So a certain business model will not work well in the US, for instance. However, in China, we've seen Pinduoduo doing really well. I believe that Meesho and mobilizing this Kirana power in Indian way, I think there could be a new interesting local business model happening, and we should watch out for those new trends.
Excellent. Thank you, Chun Soo. Dirk, as BNext, you guys have been very active across the region. How are you thinking about India, and how did you think about India when you first entered?
Yeah, so thank you, Pranav, and thank you for having us on the panel here. So, I mean, there are many perspectives. Maybe to start off and give some perspective of myself and sort of like my path to India. We started BNext in 2015 and have been active investor in India and Southeast Asia. So contrasting those two regions is quite easy for us. But I actually, which not many people know, but I started a company and I lived in India as an entrepreneur from 2009 to 2011. So I think Varsha raised a good point, which brought back some painful memories, meaning timing and patience. And when I first moved to India in 2009, it was really, I think I was chasing a mirage in the desert. The opportunity is massive. So many people that are, like on paper are sort of like underbanked or under-consumed, or basically everything is on a fairly low absolute base. And that's the perception, right, when you go in. But once you go in really deep, the nuances are just staggering by state, by country, by city, by opportunity sets within all these different facets of India, if I may say. But I think the export goods really, and talent, tech talent being one of them, really speak for it. The sheer size of the population being one of the last growth frontiers globally left and fairly nascent, as well as sort of what I find unique about India vis-a-vis, let's say, China or Southeast Asia, apart from the tech talent that we always talk about, is really, as of recent, the ambition and hunger of the founder of the last 5 years, in combination with the connectedness of NRI corridors globally. So you want to be connected and find a solution to a really hard technical problem. You will probably find somebody from IIT Bombay who is running Qualcomm's, engineering or R&D unit, etc., and you can hit them up. So that knowledge transfer, both on distribution side as well as on R&D side, insight side, market side, is just phenomenal and accelerating, producing many more unique, differentiated global models that leverage sort of the strength of both sides. And then lastly, something that is more of a local phenomenon, maybe the last 5 years, and I'll end there, is an angel network and a successful founder network, which has a willingness to pay it forward. And if you ever lived in Silicon Valley, the place is unique for really a combination of these three things. But it doesn't have, so like the tech talent, the pay it forward culture, successful founders, angel investors who are starting to invest, capital is there, and then this global hunger. But one thing that the US does maybe not have as much as India, in my books, is really this global connectedness of NRI corridors that's just massive. And so we're very excited. We have been there for 10 years, first 5 years chasing mirage, next 5 years really like being really excited. And I think now is really the golden decade and era of India, and we're very happy to be an active contributor.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dirk. And finally, Kabir, at B Capital, you guys are doing some fantastic work across Asia and the US as well. How are you looking at this country and this ecosystem?
We set up as a global fund. We invest across markets like US and Asia. I kind of look at and chair our global investment committee. So we do think of India as a really core, important market. And there are two broad set of opportunities that we think about when we look at India. I think the first is India for the globe. Also at B Capital, we have a bit of a global first mindset. So it's more about India for the globe. We're seeing several incredible examples of that. We can talk about software companies getting built where you've got incredible talent and that's selling kind of globally. We've had the privilege of investing in a few of them like iCertis, Innovaccer. So that's kind of one pool of type of opportunities we look at. And the second is India for India, which you then kind of break down, which is part of opportunities in mobility and transportation, in logistics, in other areas of digital health, in financial services and fintech. And I think what I've been investing in India and Asia for the last 15 years. I think a few points that Varsha mentioned and Dirk mentioned resonate, which is you have to have a bit of a long-term lens on the country. A few things I've always noticed, it goes through its ups and downs, And the pendulum swings quite violently, right? So I'm now based in Singapore, but you make a trip to India, you will see either a situation where the pendulum swung, where there's great euphoria on where things are going to go, or sometimes you go then there's deep pessimism. And the answer I've always said is it always lies somewhere in between. Structurally, it's just a really interesting market, and structurally very interesting market because of the talent. I think if you think about managerial talent, founder talent, engineering talent, and we compare it to globally, it's kind of right up there. So that's kind of incredible. I think you're seeing trends of clearly, smartphone penetration numbers we've all kind of seen. Data costs having come down over the last 5 years with Jio and other kind of providers. So you're seeing that adoption. So on the base of mobile and mobile platform, you are seeing the way people kind of get educated, the way people think about healthcare, the way they think about financial services completely changing. You throw on a young demographic that's open to experimenting, it does create a very interesting opportunity. Having said that, on the flip side, there are challenges, and it's what I've found always useful is the ecosystem acknowledging them and seeing ways of kind of working through them. So, how do companies scale? 5 years back, you'd probably find a handful of investors or a handful of founders and teams that have done something before. You're now seeing a sequence of serial founders and entrepreneurs. And Dirk mentioned a point of the connectedness of the world. So you see that kind of happening. You're seeing clearly an appetite for adopting technology. Take an example of EdTech. EdTech and education has been talked about for the last 10 years. You're seeing a lot more adoption right now. E-commerce and e-commerce penetration, you're seeing kind of really strong things happening there, and the enablers of that. So we think India is a really important structural market. You need to have the patience to kind of think through it, and you need to have, I guess, investment teams that understand those nuances so you can work with the best founders in the geography.
Excellent. Thank you, Kabir. Going on to the next question, the most recent cohort of winning ideas, like you said, Kabir, coming out of India are focused on EdTech, SaaS, and FinTech. Companies like Byju's, Unacademy, Icertis, Freshworks, Postman, Razorpay, and many more are testing new boundaries on growth, margins, go-to-market, and product capabilities. Many of these companies are already pursuing geographical expansion, with Singapore becoming a hub for many of their strategies. Could you walk us through a case study of an interesting company that you backed in India, your experience working with them as they scale up in their local markets, and maybe how they're thinking about regional or global expansion after that? Let's start with Kabir. Maybe, Kabir, you mentioned Icertis, Innovacer, a bunch of very interesting companies in India scaling out for you. Walk us through one of them, a case study that the panel might find interesting.
Yeah, so let's take a look at software and SaaS, and there've been clearly some benefits of software and SaaS, which we can talk about. But let's take an example of Icertis. I've had the privilege of working with the company. We invested in them in the Series C at B Capital from 2017. I've known the founder and the team since 2015. In a previous fund, I invested in the Series A. So I've seen the journey and it's been a remarkable journey on multiple dimensions. The first was, when started, it was like, how many customers do you have and how do you kind of scale up? How do you think about the talent pool? And how do you think about a global first mindset? So I think a lot of those came together. A company which is, think of it now as a global company. It's got offices in Pune, it's got offices in Seattle, it's got offices in other parts of the US and Europe. But the founders and the management team really took a global first approach. It also took an approach of saying a sector, and what they do is contract management software. And the goal of the company is how do you become the contract management platform of the world? So it was a large, audacious goal. They started with that. And 5 years back, you would be like, firstly, what is contract management? I think now the whole concept of each business, large enterprise or medium-sized enterprise, has contracts all over. And how do you have a software that helps you manage those contracts? So they've created a category, and that's been quite exciting and interesting. I think the other one is just building on the team. And I've seen a lot of companies do that, which is how do you get the right managerial talent to kind of help you scale? One thing they've done very effectively is making sure you hire ahead of time. So how do you kind of hire ahead, whether it's your go-to-market and sales, whether it's your kind of product or the technology side? I think that's the other part. We're just kind of hiring ahead. Are some of the things we've kind of learned. And then you really track your customers very closely. which is around engagement at the customer level, both the enterprise, but really thinking about the persona that's using your software, and think about engagement even in that. Even though it's a B2B play, are you thinking about what the persona, how they're using that software, and other ways you can kind of make it more effective? So those are things we've kind of seen, and I think what's interesting is you're just seeing a whole host of that in SaaS more broadly. It's a sector we're very excited about, but you're seeing now a whole host of companies, which is India for the globe, that's kind of getting established in a sector like SaaS, and I think that's really exciting and encouraging to see.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kabir. Maybe Varsha, over to you. I know Qualcomm has done some fascinating work taking Indian companies global, partnering with them in sales, go-to-market, and product. Walk us through some interesting case studies from your portfolio.
Thank you, Pranav. One of the companies I would mention is a company called Mindtickle. They're based in Pune and based here in San Francisco. And we've been associated with them since 2014. And I think they were looking to make a sales enablement product for the globe. One of the challenge is to first pack your bags and come to the country where you're going to be selling into. And I think it's a big move for anybody to just uproot themselves and their families and start business in a new country. So I think that's something that now everybody does, but it's a challenge they undertake, not just on them, but on their family. The second thing we found was trying to sell a product in a country other than India is very, very cultural and local. So you really have to understand how to sell. Our founders learn very quickly, and in the initial days of selling, it's really founder-led selling. I think Dirk can validate that. Founder has to go pound and sell your vision. And so we found that they grew very quickly and got help of sales talent here. So that was the second learning of enabling sales in a new country. The third is it's unfortunately now true here is there's so much demand for salespeople that you just have to churn through if they don't perform. And that's I think, a rhythm that we have to get used to. It's not a rhythm we are used to naturally, but it's a rhythm you have to get used to very, very quickly and work through that process and get this thing going. So I think operationally, I would say those were the three fundamental things that we learned. Thanks to Qualcomm's presence around the world, we were able to help the company in many other regions around the world as well through partnerships and business introductions. But I think as a culture, as an operation, these are some of the hard steps the founders took and grew through it and doing well. But those were the learning curves from our standpoint.
Excellent. Thank you, Varsha. Dirk, maybe you as BNext, you guys have large unicorns in Southeast Asia, many unicorns in India. Some interesting ideas that are working for you in the country?
I mean, it goes back really like the ambition of founders is often global. And the idea of a global company is great, but the path to it is pretty tricky. And I cannot overemphasize what my co-panelists have said, especially sort of the personal sacrifices that are being made by individuals and their families, but more so also really this NRI connectivity and this paying forward culture. And that's a dramatic help to most of the founders. And there are sort of 256 is such a network, obviously that helps on the investor side, which put this panel together, but also there are a lot of sort of like networks for entrepreneurs to tap into, leveraging your school connections in India, and you have successful executives in the US and all over the world that stand for something and a new generation of entrepreneurs and ambition. So I think it really starts with the founder, their sacrifice, their ambition, and then we are only here to enable. And sometimes we may know somebody and sometimes we may not, but usually if the founder really wants, and we see that, we are able to facilitate. But the real execution ultimately goes back to the founder. So nothing can stop a determined founder in my books with some help.
Excellent. Thank you, Dirk. Chansu, coming to you for the next question. India is now amongst the top 3 startup ecosystems in the world in terms of size, in terms of annual funding, but it still needs to catch up in terms of total exit volume. Recent events, however, are showing very promising signs of change in the exit pipeline. In your experience, how has the Indian exit scenario evolved over the last few years? Has it matured now such that we might actually see companies scaling faster, leading to shorter exit timelines, perhaps even going IPO more consistently? Talk to us about how you're looking at the exit pipeline in the country.
Okay, so I'll answer this question by maybe mention two things here. First, the scaling at an accelerated rate, and that will actually help us to get to IPO even faster than the previous generation. So let's talk about the two batches of unicorns. So the first batch of unicorns, I would include Flipkart, Ola, Swiggy. And these companies actually paved the way, and they had to go through a whole education of the consumers to acquaint them with the e-commerce and the first experience of the payment, electronic payments, and so on. And now we have this privilege. The second batch of unicorns that are coming up have a privilege of actually stepping upon the shoulders of these giants. And so, in my opinion, this will actually India is in a place where things will only get accelerated, and thanks to the first batch of unicorns. So second batch of unicorns, my prediction is that the time to IPO will be even shorter than the first batch and much more capital efficient. In that sense, and that is linked to the second point that I wanted to make, is that a lot of startups I see today that are becoming unicorns in India, I'll characterize them as a second batch of unicorns, and they're a lot more capital efficient than say Flipkart, Ola, and Swiggy, and therefore there is a lot of opportunity for the secondary transactions. So secondary investors who are interested in transacting those secondary shares, and so this will serve as a bridge to IPO. So I would say that in the time of say thirst, I think there now will be a lot more capital available for these more capital efficient startups, and there will be a lot more opportunities for investors. But at the same time, startups have access to capital as they reach IPO. So I think things will only get accelerated, and we'll see. I mean, we've seen all over the world that two major ways to get exit is the M&A and the IPO. I'll predict that a lot more IPOs will come out with the maybe consumer brand companies, because those are more capital efficient and the profitability is a lot more important for those businesses. However, consumer tech companies or global SaaS companies, these things it requires a lot of capital and a lot of effort to get that kind of duopoly, monopoly status. And therefore, I think the strategic buyers, the global strategic buyers, will be much more interested in acquiring them and so I'll predict that a lot more IPOs will happen with the consumer brands or India-focused B2B, whereas global B2B SaaS business to consumer tech, this will see a lot more M&As with the global big tech giants.
Excellent. Thank you, Chansey.
And just add a quick thing on exits. Three things. I think one, if we see India for the last 15 years, one will acknowledge exits has been a challenge, right? And so I think that is, it absolutely has been the case. I think the only second point I'd say is it's also a natural maturing of the ecosystem. So you had like the large Flipkart exit, and on the back of that, people are now thinking much more actively of IPO for M&A. You're starting to see some early signs of bigger strategics making kind of moves and making kind of larger investments in India. You're starting to see some of the local larger corporates kind of buying companies. So that's kind of second healthy maturing. I think the third part, which would be really good to see, is a more consistent set of exits on a per year basis, right? And I think at least the ecosystem is starting to work towards that. I take a lot of inspiration from other markets, and I love tracking other markets. But I spent some time a few years back in Israel, and if you track the Israel ecosystem, for the last 5 years, per year, they've had about $5 to $8 billion of exits per year for just VC-backed companies. So it's not just one big exit, but it's about 70, 80 companies that have exited per year for the last 5 years, and you've seen those exits. And I think and I was speaking to founders there in the ecosystem, a few learnings there, right? One is a lot of companies start with a bit of how do you scale mindset, but also by year 1, year 2, a lot of the founders and teams are thinking about, where would this be and how would I think about the natural end game. And so starting a bit early, thinking about that is always kind of a good, useful thing. I think the second part is, as long as the ecosystem, there are 300 corporates, for example, in Israel that were looking at making acquisitions. So just creating that ecosystem where larger corporates, whether it's international or from India, kind of thinking about that. So I think that's kind of a healthy part. And I think third is you are now seeing where founders and teams have had exits and you've seen some of that liquidity and you're creating now some of those founders that are becoming active angel investors. And I think that creates more momentum for, again, the next set of founders to also have exits and play that out. So I think it's a natural maturing of the ecosystem. It has been a big pain point. It's better to acknowledge that. But it's good to see the ecosystem working towards it. And speaking to an investor with a recent IPO recently, and that's just great to see. And it's fantastic for the ecosystem.
I would love to add actually another few points, different perspective on the same topic. So we're now at 34, I think, or 35 unicorns, give or take, across India, Southeast Asia. In India, there's a famous NASSCOM report sort of like estimating 4x until 2025, so in the next 5 years. I can see that in Southeast Asia as well, maybe, not a 4x, but maybe a 3x I can see pretty clearly. Then we have sort of these success cases of, let's say, an SEA having IPO'd out of Singapore in NASDAQ. And I think last time I checked, they just crossed $100 billion valuation. When they first listed 3-4 years ago, it was at, I think, under $5 billion. So I think all in all, this will produce something like $1 trillion in tech opportunities in the next 5 years here in this part of the world, combined India, Southeast Asia. And I think founders are realizing that actually being IPO, maybe even by being IPO'd in the US, it can be a massive strategic weapon, right? So the ability to then raise public market capital, whether on the debt side or equity side, an SEA is able to place $1.5 billion in 24 hours, right? That's a massive strategic weapon. So you're also almost forced from a competitive, depending on which business model you're in, but like from a competitive dynamic point of view, I think that's becoming more clear. Then last 2 points are really the easing of the path to it, right? And then ultimately dispersing the knowledge of actually how are IPOs done? Because we talked about managerial talent, it's there, but not many that have actually end-to-end IPO'd companies as a CFO or working for a CFO, right? And I think, we all heard it. We don't know maybe how it works, but I think SPAC is so the special purpose acquisition vehicle is a very interesting way to reverse IPO in the USA. There's obviously, I think there's $100 billion worth of SPACs outstanding in the US looking for targets. And I think that instrument per se is not going to go away. I think there are fundamentally advantages in the instrument, which will accelerate, I think, sort of for better or worse. And usually when you have these sort of bonanzas, you will have some sort of exuberance behavior, right? So some companies will IPO, they shouldn't be IPOing. But I think there will be a lot of knowledge being dispersed in that process, as well as it just makes sense, and bridging the knowledge gap between broader Asia and US and combining it with very liquid and active capital markets in the US. So I see huge acceleration, really the golden decade across the ecosystem over the next 10 years.
I don't know if you guys saw the PubMatic IPO that happened just a couple of days ago. I think that's a great success story for India US company. It was $1 billion plus in the ad tech space. I think that really shows us an example of what can come going forward. The regulations have also eased in India in terms of listing overseas. So I think both of those will be super helpful for us to find liquidity in the future.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Going on to the next question, Kabir, for you first. The most recent Indian GDP data for Q2 was a positive surprise. Even in the startup ecosystem, India has had a surprisingly interesting year with over $8 billion in funding already for the startups between Jan to September 2020. We're expecting it should cross at least $9.5 billion by the end of the current quarter. How are you looking at the Indian startup opportunity now as we prepare to scale up in 2021? Walk us through some interesting new categories or ideas that you'll be planning for.
Yeah, like I started the session is India goes to the pendulum, right? If you ask the same question a few months back, 24% decline in GDP, the pendulum it was a pretty stark, a very kind of negative view, right? So I'd say at some level, India will always go through these swings. It just much better think about core fundamentals, which is around how do you create really large businesses that are going to kind of scale. And so at some level, there the segments we're looking at and we're seeing some interesting opportunities continue to be areas which are like India for the globe. It's in areas like you are seeing things in online education. It's a sector we've been tracking for a while, and you're seeing a lot of the openness for learning, whether it's tuition centers or schools, to kind of using virtual a lot more strongly. So that's kind of been exciting. You're seeing digital health. I'm seeing some of the stats on remote kind of doctor visits, etc., and just digital health starting to kind of take off. Fintech. I think what's interesting is it was always a conversation happening over the last several years, but you're seeing financial services companies, both the larger corporates think about adopting technology. So the game is moving quickly. A lot of the larger corporates have done very well on digital transformation. And you are going to see that. I was speaking to a CEO at a bank, and what you're seeing even with the large corporates in the last 10 weeks is, as someone said, they've seen more transformation efforts at the topmost level in the last 10 weeks than they saw probably in the last 5 years, right? So you are seeing an acceleration both with the larger corporates, and in that context, you are seeing some interesting things happening, in the fintech space as well in India. And so I think there are kind of at the top level, there are really interesting opportunities. I think for us, a big focus is around, can we find market leading companies? So often where they're kind of number one in the segment or a path to being number one, big segments which have large addressable markets. And so, you need to kind of de-average and break it down further. And so there are some segments that we spend a lot more time on, others less on. But it's in saying, can you back leaders that can really create large transformational businesses? And when you think about the quality of talent pool, you are seeing that across education, you are seeing that across fintech, you are seeing that across digital health. And again, the whole India for the globe and global SaaS, an area we've been investing in actively for the last several years. So we continue to kind of actively double click and make investments there.
Excellent. Thank you, Kabir. Chansu, do you want to give us a view of what you're looking at for in India in 2021?
Sure. So I think every investor has a different approach to investing. Having said that, I tend to be more entrepreneur-centric than sort of trying to read the macro and see where the next trend is. However, one of the sectors that I would be interested in would be the beauty sector, the consumer beauty sector. So as a Korean investor, I've seen in Korea how this beauty industry has taken up. I believe that India will be no exception to that. And so I've seen some interesting companies and I've been speaking with them. And so beauty is one space that I will look into. The agriculture is another sector that needs a lot of innovation, and we've been waiting for it. I think it's about time. Thirdly, I would say anything digital, anything related to digital acceleration. So I'll double down, triple down on the digital acceleration. So for instance, gold loan used to be all done offline. One of my portfolio companies is Rupeek, and they've done a really innovative approach to assessing the quality and the value of the gold at the client's house. And they've created this network, amazing network with local banks. And so the business model is unique, their technology is unique, and I would double down, triple down on anything related to the companies that will leverage the digital technology.
Those are fantastic examples. Thank you, Chansu. Varsha, do you want to talk to us about how you're looking at India next year?
Absolutely. How many of us are tired of low bandwidth in India as we work, live, and learn at home? I think everybody here will raise their hands. So we think it's time to fix the plumbing. it's time to upgrade that. So at Qualcomm, we are very excited about the next transition in telecom, which is the 5G technology. And I think we have to start at the plumbing. And so we are looking to invest to ensure that the 5G transition happens smoothly and efficiently in India. So companies that will help in that 5G transition, whether they are related to networking technologies or anything else for user experience, is of key interest to us. One of our companies out of India, Singapore, and US is called Zinier. Zinier helps telecom companies manage their networks with very efficient field service solution. So wonderful way to improve your OpEx and your deployment of new technology. So we'll be looking for many more of those, whether they come in software-defined WAN or any other technologies. So we want to give all of us, whether it's users or enterprises, lots of bandwidth to do things from home. So on top of the bandwidth, we will look at applications. And applications we call in the enterprising of the home, things that will ensure that you can work from home as easily and seamlessly as you can from office. So what does that imply? That implies your security is really in place and you're not being taken to the cleaners by the hackers. So things like that are very, very interesting for us. Things in learning are important to us. I think the fellow panelists talked about that. Gaming is very interesting, as well as digital health is very interesting. So that's what we are excited about, Pranav.
Excellent. Thank you, Varsha. Dirk, you guys have been very active in the early stage, sometimes leading the conversation, many pioneering ideas. What are you looking forward to in 21?
Yeah, I think we're not done in fintech, and sort of like echoing SFF, right? Singapore FinTech Week. Let me speak a little bit about fintech, which also happens to be an area where which we love and we have invested a lot. And the way we have really from the very beginning thought about fintech and money and payment and all these things, it's like water. Money should be like water, and it should go somewhere where there's fertile ground, and it should be embeddable and communicatable with anything really in the digital arena, right? So I think that as an overarching theme and making that sort of a standardized process to embed fintech solutions in many of your workflows is maybe one. There's a company we back called YapApp, which is on the one hand a credit card issuing stack that allows you to embed this via API into your financial into any transaction you want. So if you're an automobile marketplace and you want some sort of fintech in there, you can do that through this solution. And then they now opened also or enable sort of banking products to be integrated into any digital solution and workflow. Fully compliant, fully automated, integratable via API, right? And I think that's where you see a huge delta and improvement in customer experience in the moment of truth, and not going to your bank, but when you actually transact, that you have the relevant product being offered to you and transactable and part of the transaction and not as a separate transaction. And then the second one is really, India is just phenomenal, really phenomenal. And on the fintech innovation, when you look at the India stack, and that can go against you or it can give you good tailwinds, right? So there's always a good surprise. And maybe you asked about the learnings in India. I think there's always a good surprise, even if you think you captured the opportunity in full. An example would be sort of how the India stack created and in combination with QR code standardization for merchant acceptance of payments on the one hand, UPI for zero MDR real-time payment network, Aadhaar being like your KYC, digital KYC provider, etc., and you can uniquely biometrically identify yourself, just has opened up so many opportunities. And one is really, I think, worth highlighting is a company of ours, Bharat Pay, which is essentially similar to Square in the US, if you will, but it's leveraging a very interesting moment in the history of fintech in India, which was essentially, on the one hand, you had captive merchant and issuer wallets like Paytm and wanting to keep it as closed loop as you can. And but the merchant, on the other hand, nobody focused on the merchant. The merchant, on the other hand, would have to have 59 QR code stackers on their merchant wall to accept all these different wallets, which is obviously a big headache and would have to have 50 different apps on their phone and leads to disgruntled consumers as well as merchant. And with the QR code standardization and UPI, what Openbank did is essentially focus on the merchant, standardize all these different wallets into one QR code, and then on the other hand, offer instant settlement of sort of your receivables at 0 MDR. That's a killer product that could not have been possible 2-3 years ago, maybe actually 3-4 years ago. 2 years ago they launched, and they are now, a very significant company and really locally innovated on top of local fintech innovation. So looking out for these tectonic shifts, which can be good or bad, but I hope we can find more that are good for us, that create some very unique companies locally.
Excellent. Thank you, Dirk. And a quick reminder to our audience, everyone listening, we have the question and answer set up. Please submit your questions. We'll be going through those questions very soon. Coming on to our next question, everyone on the panel. As you've obviously all read in the headlines, Indian corporate participation has increased quite quickly over the last 3 years. Telcos like Jio and Airtel, conglomerates like Mahindra, Tata, and the Times Group, and of course, domain leaders like Hero and Bajaj and Auto are all bringing more local capital, more local domain expertise into the startup ecosystem. What are your views on local corporate investment participation in the country as compared to the corporate VC experience you have across the rest of the region? Let's start with Varsha, maybe as a leading corporate VC in the country. How are you looking at this trend in India?
I'm really delighted, Pranav. I think when we entered India, I used to be with Intel Capital before, and so we had Intel, Cisco, and Qualcomm. And then we had Google enter. Now we have Samsung and others as well. But I think it's great to see the locals enter the market. We have Infosys as an example. Infosys invested in a drones company in India called IdeaForge, and we see tremendous value from that partnership. All of our local partners in India have really great knowledge on feet on street. They know how to do business in India. They know how to work with some of the challenges. So I really welcome this opportunity, and they really come in with very, very strong value add. So from my standpoint, it's not a small island of corporate venture capitals now in India, but a very broad island and a very cooperative island, I would say.
Excellent. Anyone else want to talk about corporate participation in the startup ecosystem?
I'll just quickly mention that it was about time. So there's the old saying that it takes ability to raise, and I think it's great that not only the financial investors are backing these great, amazing startups in India, but also the local giants are realizing the value of working with these startups. And so in Korea, what we've seen is that Samsung, Hyundai, SK, even steel manufacturers such as Seha, these companies have now are participating. Now it's unimaginable in Korea to think about VC ecosystem or startup ecosystem without them. And so I think that it was about time, and I'm glad that these big giants are now about to work closely with many of the startups in India.
Yeah, it's good. Just to echo that, I think it's both Varsha and Chinsu's point is it's very healthy for the ecosystem. At some level, it's a win-win and a no-brainer from both ends. Right? You've got local giants who understand the local nuances, and so it's incredibly helpful for kind of tech companies to kind of partner with them. And to be fair, for these large corporates, it just makes sense to do that. I think for each one of them, as they internally think about their own processes, their own workings, across industries, you are seeing the recognition by corporates as saying we need to fundamentally reinvent ourselves. And as part of that reinvention, I think part of it is also kind of how do you get closer to the innovation, and investment is actually a very interesting way to kind of do that. So I think it's a very healthy sign. It's a very healthy maturing of the ecosystem, and the more of this happens, it'll also lead to, as we were talking about the earlier part, beyond investments, it'll also lead to kind of M&A and exits, and again, that's just very healthy for how things play out.
Excellent. So we'll move on to questions from the audience. I'm going to blend the first two questions together, and panelists, please feel free to take the question at any point in time. So just putting two questions together, I think the trend here is we're asking about how foreign startups or foreign founders can expand into India or come into India and set up something to scale in the country. So anyone has thoughts about entrepreneurs or companies from outside coming into India to expand?
It's usually the other way. So it's an interesting question. And me having tried that maybe before its time in 2009, maybe there's a argument to be made to reverse engineer that. What we see a lot is, I mean, in China they had a name. I don't know what they're called in India, but I should know, or we should make up a name here on the panel. But returning founders who went to the US and come back and start companies, right? And there you have, and they're called sea turtles, and so they travel very far, and then they come back to mate, right? So basically they come home. And you have like Stanford educated Chinese entrepreneurs building large companies. And the way, like the highest probability of success here is usually it needs like some sort of like basically localization again when you live abroad. And I think Pranav can share that sentiment, having lived abroad and having returned. So some advice I give to founders, like come back, work for a unicorn, get your hands dirty, understand the ecosystem, find co-founders. If it's from an internationalization point of view, I would leave it to other panelists maybe to expand.
Yeah, I think we've seen two trends. I think if we, slightly reframe the question, there's some elements of the simpler one is companies think about Asia and India, and we're seeing that increasingly happen. So successful startups that are kind of scaling, they're thinking about India, or frankly, even we've had conversations even the last week with a company we're about to invest into, and the big question the founder had is, hey, how can I set up a center either in Southeast Asia or in India from a technology and development side? So I think that's a really well played out story. I think it's now people are just getting much better at it. You're seeing, for example, even companies in Southeast Asia think about how do you kind of leverage some of the tech talent in India. You're seeing it across the world. So I think that one is clearly kind of played out. I think you are seeing some of the more the kind of early stage companies think about at least how do you have deep presence in these markets. So whether it means senior team hiring, and so some of those kind of discussions are happening. And so you are seeing some of that. And then there's the talent part, which is people who work in different parts of the world and saying, where do I want to kind of relocate, which is just an ongoing conversation. I think that part maybe it got a bit impacted in 2020, given kind of what's COVID and the pandemic. But at some level, I think people also got used to the remote working, and you're now realizing it's a innovation without borders and companies without borders, and you can actually be working in any particular part of the world and still contributing. And so I think there are several of those which are how people are working has changed, and I think it's just better collaboration happening across the globe, which I think we'll see a lot more in 2021.
I'll just give an example. Our portfolio company Zoom that we are on, which is our US portfolio company, for them, the number 2 user base is in India. Right. And so it's not just consumer, but enterprises, right? So I think that you are seeing companies not just starting, but also mature companies taking India very seriously. We were very surprised by the Zoom numbers. And so I think there is opportunity. I think Dirk mentioned how the challenges of setting it up, and Kabir echoed some of those as well. But I think there's opportunity not just for startups, but for mature companies to find a meaningful base in India.
Actually, maybe on that point, I think that's a good point because we invested in a company that helps with that. So there's a company that we leverage extremely for our tech build out of teams on the one hand. And the company offers global payroll in over 150 countries by now, as well as the fully compliant. So you want to hire developers in the Ukraine or whatever, or in India. They are based in India, but they also act as potential EOR in some of these countries, so employer of record. So if you have a team you want to compliantly hire, but you shy away from setting up a full-fledged subsidiary in that country, then that I think is a nice way to test and see if it works out. And then they also do the sourcing if you want, sourcing and qualification, i.e. they've been doing this for global companies for over 20 years. And that's working phenomenally well for many to test the water. The company is called Squad, SKUAD.
Excellent, fascinating. Here's another very interesting question. I think I'll just expand the scope of this one. So India is obviously an interesting geography where there's real potential for step function change. The story in India has always been about leapfrogging adoption. The landline to the cell phone is a often quoted example. Are you seeing similar leapfrogging potential in sustainable development areas like renewable energy or electric vehicle mobility? Talk to us about some of the ideas that you guys are seeing as investors in India, and what could be the potential for startups in those areas. Anyone? Varsha at Qualcomm?
I can go. I think, with mobility, we do think, I think it's going to be fantastic. So you already talked about the cellular, jump that happened in India. So we do think that we are again on the verge of the same. Going forward. So based on if a pan-India network that can reach everywhere, we think there's opportunity now for many of these digital services to leapfrog. They could be simple services such as an emergency service in India, which doesn't exist today, right? But that you can now reach, like a 911 service in the US, you can reach that thanks to the network. So we think there's opportunity to build something there. We think the whole digital factory movement can happen in India. You'll be surprised at the number of small workshops we have in India. And I think there's opportunity now for all of those small workshops to take the same advantage like the e-commerce merchants did in this new age. So I think there's definite opportunity for a lot of digitization on the factory side. So I will leave you guys with those two thoughts that we think are possible in India.
Yeah, I think we are seeing this the big wave of digitization, already kind of taking off, and it's impacting different forms of life. You start with the small merchants in the Kirana stores. We have an investment company called Khata Book, and the way you see the engagement happen with these, the small and medium-sized merchants, that's incredible. We're seeing some of the engagement numbers there, and so you're seeing some of those kind of transforming. We've spoken a bit about healthcare. We've spoken about education. I think the way, to your point on leapfrogging, the way you kind of educate the millions of kind of students out there, you don't need to have the same setup that one imagined 10 years back. It's just a better way. Like, can you get the quality teachers to kind of disseminate that, leveraging technology? Similarly, kind of for healthcare, you want to build out the primary, the secondary, tertiary network, but is there a smarter way of providing kind of healthcare across to the country? And so I think that's something to think about. Transportation, mobility, you're absolutely right. Even the electric vehicle movement, what can happen is there just a better way for the country to kind of leapfrog that. It's already happening. And you will see that across different forms of life. I mean, look at even commerce. I think India's clearly gone through that where, I think the US went through where you went from unorganized, you had these large malls, and we've really seen what's happening to brick and mortar right now over 40, 50 year period. But even if you look at the US, like I look at the data, which is startling, but in 10 years back, online commerce as a percent of overall US retail was 6%. At the beginning of this year, it was 16%. In the last 6 months, it's gone to 26%, right? So even in a mature market like the US, you're seeing that immense boost in penetration. You're seeing that across different factors in India, and it will happen. The way commerce will take place is much more likely now using the online commerce, and some of the tailwinds we're seeing right now are going to kind of push that. And so we will see that happen probably even more so now, given what I think we've all gone through in the last 10, 11 months.
I will just add a small point to what Varsha and Kabir just mentioned. As an investor, leapfrogging in India is a fantastic phenomenon to watch, but at the same time, it really forces investors to think hard, because there's no cue to take from the other photo markets and trying to find the same one in India. And so, for instance, the e-pharmacy. I'm an investor in one of the e-pharmacy platforms in India, and we've seen companies like PharmEasy and 1mg just take off, and those are very hard to imagine in a market like Korea, where the medical distribution is just like any other country, highly regulated. But these exceptional set of entrepreneurs figured out in India how to make this real, and so. It really, at the time of investing, it really forced me to go many layers down, more so than any other investment that I had to review. So leapfrogging is a bless, but at the same time, it's a challenge for investors like us because there's no cue to take from the other foreign countries.
Excellent. Thank you, Chunsu. And with that, I think we have just a couple of minutes left. I'd like to first thank everyone on the panel for sharing their opinions, their thoughts, their plans for the next year. I think we covered a fascinating cross-section of ideas about India, your success stories in the country, how your experience has been investing in interesting companies, fascinating founders, and seeing them scale out. And of course, answering an interesting combination of questions from the audience. We'd all like to thank the organizers of the event, Switch. We're very grateful for them and the 256 network to pull all of us together today. It's been a fascinating conversation. Just as parting thoughts, I think as far as India is concerned, as an Indian myself, we're very happy to see so much collaboration happening with investors and startups across the region. I think events like Switch give us more interesting opportunities to come together, to share our learnings, and of course, collaborate and create something big and meaningful in the future. So with that, thank you so much, panelists. Thank you, Varsha. Thank you, Kabir. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Chunsu. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you, Pranav. Great opportunity.